Okay, so we're just going to wrap up nervous tissue in this second part, and I just wanted to spend a little bit more time on this slide. So again, this is a longitudinal section of a nerve, and we can see axons coming down, and we can see those Schwann cells forming the myelin sheath. And the Schwann cells are actually much closer together than many models and illustrations make it seem. And so right here is that myelin sheath gap. And so the action potential that's being sent down the axon actually hops from gap to gap. Another name for the myelin sheath gap is a node of Ranvier, and I'm trying to remember the other one, but myelin sheath gap and node of Ranvier are more than enough to remember. You can use either name, it does not matter. Over here is a slide that shows you some different types of neurons. So there are multipolar neurons, there are bipolar neurons, and there are unipolar neurons. And when we're talking about the poles, we're really just talking about how many major extensions it has. So here we're looking at the multipolar neuron, and the multipolar neuron has all sorts of different branches, right? So we have all these dendrites up here, and we have this axon down here. Here are the dendrites up here, and the axon down here. So these cells are called the Purkinje cells, and they're found in the cerebellum. And these are the pyramidal cells. And so these have to do with motor, with actions. Okay. The bipolar cells, we have a pole coming over here and a pole coming over here. So that's a bipolar cell. And here is an olfactory bipolar cell. And here's a retinal bipolar cell. And so you can see there's a major branch over here and a major branch over here. And so bipolar cells tend to have, something to do with the special senses. And most times when I teach this class in person, somebody asks if there's any connection between bipolar disorder and bipolar cells, and there is not. That's just so the bipolar disorder is talking about the kind of swings from manic to depressive episodes, and the bipolar cells just happen to have two poles, so they're called bipolar. And over here we have the unipolar neurons, and so there's a single process, and the cell body is kind of off to the side of that process. And so the most common unipolar neurons are the sensory neurons. And so here's the receptive endings. So receptors in our skin, muscles, what have you, are going to send information up the dendrite to the axon. So this part is where the axon starts. And it completely bypasses the cell body and goes into the central nervous system. So this cell right here is a cell body that's found in an area called the dorsal root ganglion. Neurons are such interesting cells, right? They're so different than any of the other cells that we've been looking at. Their cell bodies are really kind of separated from the axons. And these neurons are very long. So this cell body is, I mentioned, found in the dorsal root ganglion. And dorsal root ganglions are found right by the spine, and right by the spinal cord. And these receptive endings might be at your little baby toe or something. So neurons are very long cells. And for the most part, the cell bodies of neurons are kind of grouped together. If the group of the cell bodies is outside of the central nervous system, it's called a ganglion. If it's inside the nervous system, it's called a nucleus or nuclei. let me get that out of there. Let's see if I can. Okay. So here is just a view of how neurons work. So here are the receptive endings, or the receptors that we find in the skin. And so there's going to be a stimulus that triggers the receptive endings to send a message towards the central nervous system. So when it's going towards the central nervous system, it's afferent. So this is the afferent pathway going up the sensory neuron. Here's that dorsal root ganglion with the cell body, and it goes into the spinal cord. At the spinal cord, that signal is going to be transferred to another neuron, often an interneuron. And then the interneuron is either going to send the signal up to the brain, or it's going to send it out to a motor neuron. And so the message going out is efferent. Okay, so afferent is going towards the central nervous system, and efferent is exiting, going away from the central nervous system. So say you stepped on a nail. You step on a nail, that signal is going to come up, get processed by the interneuron, and the interneuron is like, this is a really serious thing. I'm going to tell the muscle to contract right away. If instead you stepped on a pebble or something like that, that information might go to your brain so you can process it a little bit more. Regardless of whether it goes to the brain or just stays within the interneuron, the information is going to go out the efferent pathway, and it's going to tell the muscle or gland to do something. In this case, it's telling the muscle to contract. And so that's just the pathway of a signal like that. We're going to go through more of that. All right. So we've kind of gone through neurons, we've gone through neuroglial cells, and I've mentioned a nerve a little bit, but I haven't really talked about what a nerve is. So a nerve is the organ of the nervous system. So, I mean, the brain is an organ as well, the spinal cord is an organ, but the nerves are the organs that are found in the peripheral nervous system. And what a nerve is a bundle of axons, okay? And it's actually bundles of axons. So here we have the axon of a neuron, and it's myelinated. It has a myelin sheath. And wrapped around that myelin is connective tissue. And that connective tissue is called the endoneurium. Okay? Here we have a bundle of these axons with their myelin sheath, with their endoneurium covering, and around that bundle is its own connective tissue. So this is the perineurium. And the perineurium wraps around a bundle that is called a fascicle. So this bundle of axons is called a fascicle. Within a nerve, there's usually multiple fascicles. So here we have 1, 2, 3. You could actually count these as 2 fascicles. So 3, 5, about 7 or 6 or 7 fascicles in here. And so we have the fascicles, and we have blood vessels traveling together down this nerve. And all the fascicles are bundled together, and they have their own connective tissue holding the nerve together, and that's called the epineurium. So epi is covering or over, right? So it's the epineurium is the connective tissue that covers or goes over the nerve. Peri means between. So the perineurium is the connective tissue that separates the fascicles. And the endoneurium means within. So within the fascicles, surrounding the axons and their myelin sheath, we have endoneurium. Okay? These prefixes you're going to see again later in 217 and also in 218. So this is a slide that is a cross section of a nerve. And so myelin kind of looks like a marshmallow with a stick through it, right? So the stick would be the axon, and the myelin forms the marshmallow. And so surrounding this myelin, you're going to have that endoneurium, that connective tissue that surrounds each axon and its myelin sheath. Okay, some axons are more myelinated than others, and some aren't myelinated at all. So right here, there's an unmyelinated axon, and these are very well myelinated axons. And these are, middle of the road myelinated axons. So we're looking at a cross-section of a fascicle. And so on the outside of this fascicle, you can see the perineurium. But this fascicle is also at the edge of a nerve. So here's that perineurium over here. And then just outside of that is the epineurium. So we have the epineurium, the perineurium, and then the endoneurium wrapping around these myelinated axons. So that covers the structural part of the nervous tissue. So make sure you go over these slides, use your most important points to label the practice slides, and you will do fine.